Welcome, everyone. Thank you for all of you that have joined us today for National Grief Awareness Day. We're spending time today just honoring the fact that we so many of us move through grief, or going through grief, and deal with grief after the loss of a loved one. We are up for our next session. This is our third session for the day, and it is how to cope with the loss of the parent. In just a few moments, we'll be joined by Tara Accardo. Tara is a grief coach, and after losing both of her parents to cancer within 6 months of each other, Tara's journey with deep, profound grief began. As time passed and her healing continued, she had the realization that she no longer wanted her losses to overcome her. With that, she created Losses Become Gains in 2022. Her methodology in approaching grief goes beyond just focusing on the acute grief, as grief is a lifelong struggle and stays with us long after loss occurs. That's the approach she takes in guiding others with healing emotional wounds. Losses Becomes Gains began as a blog and then evolved into her Grief Become Gains online course, the Losses Become Gains podcast, and the Losses Become Gains daily journal. Tara also offers one-on-one coaching. Please join me in welcoming Tara to the stage. Hi, Tara.
Hi.
It's a pleasure to meet you. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
To hear from you and hear your advice on how to deal and cope with the loss of a parent. Losing a parent is a very specific thing that most of us have to deal with at some point in life. And some of the people on the stream today may have recently gone through the death of a parent, or may have gone through a death of a parent many, many years ago and are still grieving that and feeling it. And some may just want to listen because their parent might be sick, or they know that this may eventually happen. So we would love, we're just thrilled that you're able to join us today and share your thoughts and your advice on how to cope with this type of grief.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Parents in a short amount of time, is that right?
Yeah, they were within 6 months of each other. So my mom, and I can go into a little bit of my story, but basically my mom died in December of 2019 and my dad was July 2020. So within 5 or 6 months of each other.
Can you share a little bit about your process of grief and how, our last speaker talked about how her parents also died very closely together, and she actually had to put one on the shelf so that she and then grieve one at a time because she couldn't just handle all of it together. Can you share a little bit about your process and what you had to work through on your journey?
Yes, that is so relatable. That is definitely one of the things I wanted to bring up today, because I feel like I went through anticipatory grief for sure with both parents, because they both died from cancer. They ultimately kind of went downhill, for lack of a better term. They had their health decline. And so there was grief around watching that, which honestly, a lot of grievers I talk to that have gone through grief like this, I swear so many people say the anticipatory grief is almost worse than the actual losing of them, because it's so painful and so difficult and so heart-wrenching to see them in that state. We don't want them to die, but it's almost this sounds so slimy, and I know how hard this is to admit, but there's almost a sense of relief. And I think that needs to be said when they do die, and not because they're gone, but it's just they're out of pain. We frankly are out of our own personal anguish of watching it and just all that entails. And then caretaking on top of it, or just, how it can affect our day to day. It is almost impossible to focus on anything else. And then a lot of us will still have families, or we have kids or work or something on top of it. And it's amazing any of us can function, quite frankly. So there's the anticipatory grief, and then of course the grief itself, which I can touch on in a moment, but the delayed grief. And it's actually so funny. I literally just launched a blog post about this the other day, because it is something I know well. And so with my mom dying first, You know, I didn't even, my dad like started going again, he started his decline maybe like a couple months afterward. So we were grieving her loss together. And then, you know, you hear about this kind of happening, like people will die sometimes close together. It was a very Romeo and Juliet type of situation, to be quite honest, which is like painful to think about, but also kind of the sweetest thing ever because they were married over 35 years. I mean, I don't think he wanted to be here without her. He didn't know how to, and he had been, you know, I kind of hate the word fighting, but he had been journeying through prostate cancer for like 6 years at that point. And I think he was done. And it's not that he didn't want to be here with me. And I know that. And we've had a lot of beautiful conversations leading up to his death, which I realize I'm very fortunate to have. I just want to acknowledge anybody here who, you know, didn't get to have those conversations with their loved one, parent or not. You know, people who lose someone very quickly, like you feel robbed of that opportunity. But, you know, there was a little bit of peace in that regard. But yeah, 100%. Once dad started declining, mom had to go on the shelf, so to speak, that grief. And then I remember the morning my dad died. So it wasn't just him, but it's like almost like three types of grief, right? It's the grief of my dad, the grief of my mom, and the grief without both. And I remember sitting on my couch and just staring out my patio window. And I was like, what now? Like, what is my life now? I've never felt so lost and alone and confused in my entire life. So I think that's really where the grief almost kind of began, to be honest with you.
We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes because I'd like to focus in on that just a little bit more. But before that, are there sort of normal feelings? Is there, I don't know if the normal is the right word, but are there sort of normal feelings that people experience after the loss of a parent?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things I just mentioned for sure. So feeling just extremely lonely, very isolated, very, you know, you could be kind of that feeling of like, you could be surrounded by all of the right people. You could be surrounded by lots of loved ones and everything. But if it's not your people, if it's not the person you're really missing, it's kind of like, it's just not the same, right? So we have to grapple with that. And then just all of the day-to-day stuff, right? I think that goes so unrecognized and so unnoticed sometimes. So, you know, you hear it all the time, like just getting out of bed is so difficult. Just doing kind of like what things we would normally maybe take advantage of. I don't want to say like menial tasks and things like that, but it's such a energy suck really to, you know, be able to function just as a normal human every day. And then just the societal pressures and pressures from work and other people too, to kind of like get back to normal, or, you know, those feelings or comments of like, shouldn't you kind of be over it by now? It's been a few months, like, or, you know, it's been a year, whatever. I hate those comments so much. It's just so, it's so unfair. There's no one size fits all of this, right? And so it just minimizes it so much of what someone is going through. So I think those are probably the most prominent things I felt with my parents. I also felt, frankly, a lot of resentment and shock for sure. So those two kind of went hand in hand for me a little bit, with like shock of like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe they are both gone. What did I do to deserve this? What did I do in a past life to deserve this? You know, that sort of that guilt. Guilt and regret is another one. Sorry, there's so many things here, but guilt and regret over things I did or didn't do, or didn't say, or, oh, I wish we had just pushed mom to go to the doctor sooner. She'd be here right now. And all of those things, which is really all for naught, right? She's gone. There's no point in lingering on that, but we can't help it sometimes. So you know, that's a big part of it too. Just so many feelings under the sun, and it can ebb and flow too, right? You might be okay one moment, you might be feeling some anger and stuff one moment of the day, and then you're kind of okay, and then that goes into, just extreme sadness and longing. I think longing really needs to be talked about too, because that can really last a long time. I still long for my parents, and some moments kind of more than others. But, the last thing I'll just say here too, that I think is important, and this again goes for any loss, but I think parent loss, especially if you lose them, I'm going to say earlier than you feel you should, because I feel robbed of years with them. But I think it's important to recognize other life events that they will not be there for. So I had to get married without both of them. I'm pregnant currently with a little girl, and they're not going to be here throughout all of this. And so even right now, I'm like grappling with that, not being here throughout the pregnancy, what I wouldn't give to talk to my mom about some of these things. They're not going to be able to hold her, and all the other milestones. And that is a lot. So I don't always encourage people, to think that far ahead, but I just want to acknowledge that those are things that we kind of have to like re-grieve over time. And so I think that, that's a big part of it. And that's why I like to say, grief is not the acute grief, just the, dealing with it that first 6 months or a year. And people are always like, oh, the year's the hardest. The first year's the hardest. There might be some truth to that, but I just think it's important to recognize that, like, no, there's big life events that can really bring up a lot of new grief, and, grief that we didn't even know was in there yet. So.
Right. Well, let me first say congratulations on your baby. That's exciting.
Yeah.
What would you say to the people that are in complete shock after their parent passes and feel numb and think that something might be wrong with them because they're not crying? They're not having they're not having the same emotive sort of response that people normally have. Do you see this from time to time, and is this normal?
Yeah. Absolutely, it's normal. I just want to start by saying that. And I think, and I of course I won't say any names, but I do have a client actually that came to me. This was one of the many things that they wanted to talk through. They're just like, I just find this really weird. I'm not crying. I don't know what's wrong with me. It was very much like, there's something wrong with me. And I was like, says who? Really? I mean, because grief is like such a comparative game, I think. And one thing I will just say that I think is really important to remember too, and I've talked about this recently on social and things, is, we each experience grief differently, number one, but we're all raised differently. We all have different expectations of what grief looks like based on a lot of factors. I mean, where we live, where we went to school, who our parents were, or like who we were raised by. I didn't have two parents. Just were we raised to cry, or were we, scolded if we showed emotion? And, not really. And with this particular client, we talked through that, and they had this realization, like, oh my God, I was taught not to cry. I could not show emotion in my family. So I feel like with things like that, I'm not a therapist. I just want to put that out there. So I don't know. I don't want to get into childhood trauma, but I think it's important to just, if anybody's really struggling with some very severe shock, first of all, take a breath. First and foremost, always take a breath. Always come back to the breath. And take a step back. And we have to be, as grievers, we develop this skill, I think, of being really good and like having to ask ourselves the tough questions. And we can reach out for help, right? We can have a counselor, a therapist, a grief coach. And that's what I'm here for, right? Is to ask those questions. But in those times where you maybe can't meet with a professional, we sort of have to like be our own grief coach a little bit. So I would just encourage people to take a step back, take a breath, and think about that. And like, where am I getting this from? Who is saying that it's strange that I can't cry? Number one. And then, again, if that's the case, and, where could this be stemming from? Where is this belief stemming from that this is a problem? And what I've noticed, grief work, the idea of grief work is very broad, and I won't necessarily get into all of that right now, but, there's various things. And that's why I find journaling so important. It's why I created one. I encourage meditation, breath work, big time, because with shock and just with grief, I think in general, we can live very much in the past and we can live very much in the future. We're like, I miss how things were. We're stuck. We're stuck there. And or, oh my gosh, I'm dreading my entire future. I don't want to be here. It is so sad to me how many people I see just like on Instagram who will comment on something that are like, I'm here because these other people are here. Otherwise, I don't want to be here. Like, it's the worst thing you could possibly hear, because we still have big, beautiful lives to live. We have a responsibility to live our most vibrant, fulfilled selves, even after our loved ones die. So to, hear that, those are the people that I want to help and just understand, like, okay, wait a second. You're like, don't overwhelm yourself. Just take it back to the present. So that's just what I encourage people to do, really, with any emotion, but shock is a big one. Is just be like, okay, what is here in front of me? Okay, here's my desk. It's wood, it's brown. Like literally just start at baby steps. It's just all about baby steps. So, I think, and we have to do it a lot of times. I mean, that bringing back to the present thing can take a lot of energy. It is like in meditation too. I know some people might not be super into meditation. I found it really difficult to do early on because I was like, my brain was just, it would not stop. But your brain's not supposed to turn off during meditation. I think that's a misconception about that. You do want to allow those thoughts to come in. And the reason I mentioned meditation again so fervently is that we want to allow those thoughts to come in, cope with them, recognize them, and then let them go. And it's just a process of doing that over and over. And with that does come some healing. So those are just a few examples of ways to, and again, journaling too, whether it's a prompted journal or just free writing, I think is really therapeutic. We're all different. So I think we kind of all have to find what works for us, but those are just some examples that I personally use to, cope with shock for sure, but a wide range of other emotions too.
That's great. There's a book, I can't remember the author at the moment, but it's called Getting Into the Gap. And it's an excellent book on how to quiet your mind. And it provides a very, very like elementary way to quiet your mind. And I found it to be very, very helpful. It was transformative in my meditation experience. So for those that might be interested in learning how to quiet your mind during a very difficult time, Getting Into the Gap is a good place to start. Out of curiosity, how does losing a parent change your identity?
Oh my gosh, where do I start? I think for me, one of the biggest things for me was like, I was very blessed. I had like literally the best parents ever. And they were perfect for me and what I needed in this lifetime, even though they weren't here as long as I hoped they would be. And they taught me a lot of things. They taught me to be very, very strong, independent, but they were always there for me, right? It wasn't like they were gonna just let me fall over here, but they just instilled these really beautiful lessons in me. And I think one of the things that I struggled with the most when once I didn't have them, was feeling like, and I should also mention I'm an only child too, so I don't have siblings. Even if you do have siblings, you all experience it differently, but I really had that fewer people to lean on as I was going through this, to really understand what it meant to be the daughter of Greg and Lori Jordan and what that felt like. So I really, again, this is kind of where some of the resentment came in, and this is where a lot of soul searching sort of had to happen. I just felt like I needed to take on so much by myself. Almost to a fault, like to the point where I would actually sort of push people away, or I would get annoyed with people if they weren't sort of like giving me the right help. And I think that's really important too for anybody here who's maybe trying to support a griever, is to offer the help, but think about the type of help that the person really needs, and not just saying like, okay, call me if you need anything, because odds are that the griever's not going to call. It's like they got enough going on. And for me, I am the type of person, like, I don't want to burden people. My maiden name is Jordan, and I laugh that it's like, that's such my dad's side of the family. It's such a Jordan trait. Like, we don't want to burden people. So it's been a big lesson in learning how to trust myself, because I didn't have parents to go to for various things. Still won't for a long time. So there's a lot of stepping into our identity, finding almost a new identity actually, and embracing that and realizing that's actually not that bad of a thing. And that's the whole concept of losses become gains, is like, we can find gains from our losses. We can discover things that we can learn and grow and evolve through from whatever loss we go through, whether it's a parent or anyone else, really. So trusting in myself and my intuition, really got to know my intuition very well. But also knowing and understanding that I could trust others, and you got, being careful with who you do that with. It is really important to keep the right kind of support and the right kind of people you can trust around you. But, trust is a big component. Communication too. I think communication and boundaries actually sort of went hand in hand a little bit for me. I really realized that people can't read my mind, my husband especially. So I just had to be more strategic with, like, this feels good to me right now, I'm going to do this. This does not feel good to me. This does not feel kind of like in alignment with where I am or where I want to be. And just, again, just getting to know that side of myself outside of my parents. And I didn't have a particularly like codependent relationship with them, but it's a big, shocking contrast when you can go from talking to them on the phone every day, giving them a hug, texting them, to radio silence. And so there is a lot of shock that comes with parent loss too. And a lot of, it's like what they always say, no matter how old you are, you still need your parents. And that could not have been truer for me. So I think it's just, again, it's that trust aspect, communication, just making sure that you're just, again, communicating well with those around you, which I want to point out is so hard in the beginning. So like, if anybody here is like really new grief, this is not to put pressure on you. It's not to say like, well, you still need to figure out how to communicate with people even 2 weeks after. No, this comes with some time. But if we can at least just be like, nope, I'm not there today, or yep, all right, that feels okay. That's where we start. And then you just build on it from there. And then a big part of the work that I do is not only just grief coaching. I'm actually getting a certification to be a soul purpose coach, and sort of I want to marry those two things, because with parent loss, or even with child loss, or, different types of losses too, we question our identity. We're kind of like, why am I here? Or, like, where am I? What am I doing? So a big part of it too is kind of like, just rediscovering ourselves and what we enjoy doing. And my whole thing is a very Marie Kondo mindset, like what sparks joy, and coming back to that and continue asking ourselves that question, because, parents can have a lot of sway over us, actually, like decisions, and just, we go to them so some of us go to them for a lot of things. So when one dies and we don't have that lifeline, that resource, it's, you gotta look inward. So I think that's just a big part of the process too, is that looking inward. And, again, I keep coming back to the intuition thing, but that is just such a big piece of it, I've found.
Out of curiosity, I remember when my father passed, people kept saying, "Welcome to the club."
Mm-hmm.
And
The
it was like
club.
the other people that had lost their parents, they would just say, "Welcome to the club." Like, you've now entered this new phase of life. Welcome to this, being parentless, either with one parent or both parents. And I'm wondering, I had to say that it was somewhat comforting to know that others had taken that journey and gone through that journey ahead of me, and there was sort of a net to fall into with my friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd love to ask you, are there certain things that people said to you or that you would recommend saying to someone when they're in this moment of incredible grief, and that especially in that acute stage? Like, what do you say? Because so many people don't know what to say in those moments. And with respect to what you were talking about with communication, it's just so important to figure out how to stay connected with other human beings during this period. So do you have any words of wisdom in terms of what to say to someone?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm laughing because it's almost like I almost have more examples of what not to say to somebody than I do of what to say. I'm just going to say something really simple as far as like trying to find the right words, because I think what so often happens, and you probably experienced some of this, I feel like we all have to some degree, is in people trying to be helpful and people trying to be supportive, they can sometimes almost take it a step too far. And that's when they're saying the wrong thing. They're almost like overcompensating for the loss, right? So one of the things I always encourage people not to say is, oh, well, at least, those at least statements, right? Like, oh, at least they had a good life. At least, well, my parents did suffer a little bit. So, but like if there was a instance where they didn't suffer, at least they didn't suffer. At least you got to say goodbye. Those are like the most toxic statements, and kind of offensive too, really, maybe ever, because it does kind of two things. Well, it does a lot of things, but it does like two things that really come to mind. It minimizes how the griever is feeling. And again, it kind of is that comparison game. And I had people do this to me where they were just like, well, at least you got to say goodbye. I didn't get to say goodbye to my parents. And then they went off on a tangent about themselves. And I'm like, I'm kind of in my own bubble right now. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your parents' loss, but I can't hear about this right now. So things like that end up being, I get it. I get why people say it. In fact, I think I probably said it too before I went through everything I did. But it is probably one of the least helpful things that anybody could possibly say. So I think with the things of what to say, quite frankly, less is more. It's just, for me, I think and this really depends on the person too, by the way. Some people really do kind of want to be left alone in their grief. They don't want people showing up on their doorstep. They don't want a lot of people around them. Frankly, that was me. I didn't actually I wanted to be alone, to be honest with you. I felt lonely, but I needed that time to like process my reality. Some people are the total opposite. So I think I kind of alluded to this before, but I think, asking the griever questions, but not like really open-ended questions. Like, would you mind if I dropped off food for you on Thursday? And I'll leave it at your doorstep. You don't have to say hi or anything, but I can come in if you want me to for like 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Just inching your way in, kind of, and gauging what they respond best to. One of the things that some of my best friends did for me that I was so grateful for, they did like a food train and they got just a ton of food. So my husband and I didn't have to like think about it for a week. There was like nothing said about it. It just showed up on my doorstep. And I'm pretty sure I cried over it because the last thing I even wanted to do was eat, let alone cook or basically do anything else. So we kind of have to, I think people who are trying to support the grieving just have to take it out of their hands a little bit sometimes. And it's just that classic, actions speak louder than words. If it doesn't make sense to kind of act in a way like that, I think just continuing to check in, not bombarding them, but just continuously being like, hey, I'm thinking of you today. I am here to talk. But again, not being like, you come to me, just continuously coming to the griever, and just checking in. That's it. And I feel like it's one of those things where they'll talk if they're ready and they want to. And yeah, I mean, again, just that less is more. We don't need to pretend like we know what they're going through, even if we kind of do. Again, like I've come across people that have lost parents too, but we all experience it differently, or maybe we lost our parents in different ways. So there's, we don't want to assume anything, I think. So the safest bet is just showing continuous support, and definitely through the acute grief. But I still have friends that are just like, hey, this memory of your mom popped up today. I thought I'd share it with you. Or, whatever it is, or, sending Lori love on her birthday. And I'm like, oh my God, you remembered. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one sometimes. So that kind of thing. And that lasts for years, right? That lasts a lifetime. So, just having the forethought to
actually
be
talk.
supportive.
One of the things we did a little bit of research early on with BlueButterfly about the things that people often, when you ask, how can I help? The person is so overwhelmed with grief, they don't actually understand. Can't actually think. They know they need help, but they can't think about what those things are. And I think meals always come up as in the top of the list. It's just making a meal or taking over or sending Uber Eats or something, just so the person doesn't have to worry about cooking and cleaning. The other is actually cleaning, interestingly enough.
That's a great point.
Just over to the person's house and being able to just be like, hey, listen, what if I get the kitchen today or something like that? Just helping in that way. The other one that we think that we've seen is meals and cooking. Taking the kids. Yeah, just like babysitting. How about if I babysit the kids or take the kids out to the park or do something like that to get them out of the house? Because sometimes the parents, if they're a parent, if they have children, then they are so focused on their own grief. Sometimes they're not interacting with the kids the way they normally would, and the kids just need to get out. And the kids feel that pain as well, and sometimes they just need to get out and run around or go play or something like that, or go get ice cream, something that's fun that the parent might not be thinking. So we've seen those as well. So I think all of these things somewhere in here, there's different ways to show up for your friends and family members that are grieving. Question for you. Let's see. You talked about losses become gains. Can you give us a little bit more about what this actually means?
Yeah. So for me, the idea and concept of losses become gains is kind of like I said, to find gains from your losses. So in my mind, that is really to discover what we can learn from our losses, how we can grow from it, how we can evolve in spite of our loss or losses, if you're like me. Because I lost a dog too, I should mention. It's my 19-year-old Bichon Frise, and I was like mom one year, dad the next, dog the following year. She's like a little sister to me. So I want to acknowledge pet loss here too. It's a big deal. So, I'm like, okay, I lost my entire immediate family in the span of like 2.5 years. Where do I go? What do I do now? And so the idea of losses become gains came to me, I guess, early last year, early 2022. And I just had this realization where I was like, I can't continue living this way. But I was actually at a point in my journey, because I had been doing the grief work, I had been journaling, I had been doing the things, reading inspirational books, like all of it, where I was just like, I'm actually doing pretty well, given the fact that I've been through what I've been through. And I was talking to somebody, and this idea, this concept of, losses become the things that you gain in life in a weird way, came to fruition. And I was like, ooh, that's really catchy. That idea is so true. And I know that's so impossible to feel sometimes for grievers, like, trust me. And again, if this is like early on for you, you might not be ready for this message, but again, so even if you're a while out from what you've lost, sometimes we can't see it. We can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. But this idea of finding gains from your losses challenges that a little bit. So it's finding community, finding joy, fulfillment, meaning in life after loss, and knowing and believing that is so possible, and having a little bit of fun while we do it. Like, if you were to go on my Instagram, like, for the most part, I'm pretty smiley. Like I don't, and that is not a front. It's because grief sucks. And there is this grief club, and so many of us are in it. And it's one of those things where eventually, and this is kind of where I want to help people get to, there's a point where it's just like, let's just own this. Like, let's call a spade a spade. This is the worst thing we could possibly go through. Again, no matter who the loss is, really. But let's be there for each other. Let's support each other. And let's figure out how we can go from just existing, just having this existence where we're not enjoying any piece of our life, to living and thriving, not just this surviving. Again, it can really feel like that in the beginning. So it's not to rush anybody here, but it's just, I always say, especially in my course and everything, we're just planting seeds here. I don't expect anybody to get there right away. And again, you could be feeling on a high one day, you could be feeling great, and then you have a rough day or a grief trigger comes along and you're knocked on your butt again. That's the name of the game. So really, just at the end of the day, it is finding gratitude in what you do have. And another aspect of this is finding a daily practice to do this successfully. So a lot of my tools and resources, provide that for grievers. I have my journal, like my course, all of that teaches, how to do that and how to tap into that. Because we have to start somewhere. That's the thing. I think there can be a lot of closed-mindedness when we're really stuck in our grief. We cannot believe that we'll ever come out of it. But that's the point of losses become gains. It's just to, again, plant the seed that like, oh, but you can. But let's take a step back. Let's take this a day at a time. How are you feeling really right now? And going from there. And because it can feel really overwhelming when we try and think about like, oh, I can't move on without my person. I don't know, what am I going to do? And then typically for me, when I hear people say that or I see that, is because they're thinking too far ahead, or they're thinking in the past. They're not right here. So that's really the gist of that, and what we try and help people get through that initial part.
That's very, very helpful. A quick question for you. We're going to move over to questions from the audience. So if there's anyone in the audience that has a question for Tara, please enter it now, put it in the chat room, and we'll make sure to ask it. In the interim, can you explain to us for those that do not know, what a grief coach actually does? Like it sounds like a counselor, but is it actually a counselor? Are you laying on someone's couch? Like, what do you do? What do you do?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I love this question. I think it's an important one. Just to clarify the difference. And actually, I think grief coaching is actually a bit newer, to be honest. I don't know officially when it came about, but I certainly, when I was, I went to therapy for a short time, right after my dad died, or actually kind of during it, to be honest with you, because I was also going through a breakup at the time, because, Murphy's Law, it's just life, right? And so I was just like, okay, I need to talk to somebody about this. I need a third party. And I didn't really know about grief coaches at the time, but basically a grief coach is different than a therapist or a counselor. So we work together to move forward. As I've mentioned, we're not here to dig into the past very much. Certainly not, again, childhood traumas where we are not equipped to help with that. That requires a lot of training. So much respect to therapists and counselors out there who go through that education. But we really don't try to give answers. We're not here to fix or diagnose or treat people that we work with. We're not here to diagnose things like depression or anxiety. And in fact, if any good grief coach, if you come to them with that type of those feelings, or if you get into sessions with them and that's what is coming up for you, and it's really a lot deeper, and you're kind of not in a place where you're like, okay, I'm present and I'm ready to move forward, and you're still dealing with some pretty intense stuff from the past, a good grief coach will refer you out, because that is not what it's not what we're here to do. But really, we're more future focused. So we just start right where you are. And we really emphasize self-knowledge. So I really empower my clients, self-knowledge, self-empowerment, self-development, self-management, The goal really is personal growth after a loss. So my goal would be to move, again, I've kind of said this, like move someone from just functioning and existing to highly functioning and really living and really thriving. We kind of dig into the what's next questions, and we talk about the grief for sure. Don't get me wrong. We deal with what's in front of us, but eventually there is this element of like, okay, so how do we deal with this? How do we cope with this grief on an everyday basis? And the things that are going to come up without looking too far ahead. But it's very action focused, and we really emphasize, very healthy behavior and healthy thinking, and of course, throughout all of this, just honoring your loved ones as much as possible in the process. So for me, it's really about combining all of this. I mentioned the training I'm doing to become a soul purpose coach. And so for me, specifically as a grief coach, that's where I'm trying to kind of bring this all together, so who am I after this loss? What now? How can I really, embody who I'm meant to be and live my best life now that I don't have these extremely important people in my life? And these are big questions, right? This can also feel intimidating, but my goal is to make that exciting. And it's not to make it intimidating. It's not to make it overwhelming. It's to actually be like, we can honor and bring our loved ones with us through this journey. But the work has to happen here, because we're the ones that are still here. So we got to figure it out somehow. So
well, that's very helpful. We're looking for questions. If there are any questions from the audience, we have one question. How do you handle anniversaries and birthdays?
No, that's a big one. I have actually in my course, I have literally an entire module on this because it's a very hefty topic. There's a lot of things. I mean, again, I just want to call a spade a spade. These are the hardest times of year that we have to get through, so I think there's so much around the holidays and anniversaries, but the day-to-day can be difficult, and then it can be really amped up on those holidays and anniversaries. I think there's a few things that just come to mind for me. Number one, however you can acknowledge and honor your loved ones throughout those holidays. So I don't want to call out any holiday specifically, but it can be, maybe having if you're like celebrating around your house or something, having a picture up, or for example, I celebrate Christmas. So I have an ornament of my parents, and I have one with my dog's little paw print on it, and they're around. I cook things that, it's more of a baking thing because my mom and I were bakers, but, baking things that they enjoyed, and just, continuing the legacy a little bit. So if there's maybe like an activity or something that you normally enjoyed, and I know how painful it can be to do those things without them. So if it doesn't feel, this is again, that intuition, right? It has to come in. Like if something's not feeling right, or if you're not ready, don't force it. But if you can what I like to sort of think of it as is like marrying newness, marrying like, okay, what feels good now versus like what feels good to bring in that you did with them. And in my world, just as an example, maybe someone else has gone through this, I don't have my parents, obviously. I have my in-laws nearby, which is wonderful. And now with baby on the way, I want to make sure that my parents' memory and the things that my side of the family did don't die with them. That, I want to make sure that she's gonna know my traditions and things. So, sometimes you have to work a little harder to bring those in, but just doing it in a way that feels right. I also want to just say, if you don't want to celebrate a holiday or anniversary, or you just don't want to acknowledge it, you don't have to. I mean, that sounds so funny. And I know that and again, I think if you were to ask yourself, okay, do I want to acknowledge it this year? Or do I want to just like, sometimes especially early on, if you want to just gloss over it, those are two very opposite things. So I usually, if you ask yourself that question, one will feel better for you than the other. And if it takes some pressure off to just not that year, that's okay. Don't do it, with holidays and anniversaries, I think the biggest thing is just don't force anything. If you're invited somewhere and you are just not feeling it, don't go. Don't feel the pressure to go. I know this is like very high level. I know there can be a lot of complexities, especially family or whoever is involved, but that comes back to the communication part too a little bit, and just being very honest with people. Like, I'm not really in a good place right now to come and do this. And just being very honest about it. But there are so many beautiful ways to work in their memory. Maybe it's like a memory, a candle or something. I always do that for my parents too. Or, there's a lot of creative things out there. There's again, a blog section on my website if you want to go check it out. These are just, again, some examples, but there's beautiful ways to work their memory in while creating new memories, which can be very painful. I know that concept can feel like we're sort of replacing them or something. That's not it. And I promise you, they're around, they're seeing everything going on. And I think we have to remember too, that like, we're still, I'm going to get a little woo woo here for a second, but we're still here in a very physical, material, ego driven world, right? Where our loved ones are now. I don't want to get into beliefs here or anything, but basically the gist of it is they're no longer here. So those kinds of things I just don't want people to put the pressure on themselves of like, oh my gosh, my mom and dad wouldn't like this. They're good. They're not, there's no ego where they are, right? Because that's a very human body thing to experience. So just releasing some of the pressure of feeling the need to do a lot. And, there's always next year, right? I guess, we know that there might not always be next year, I guess, but see, dark humor also helps. But it's just one of those things where, I just always encourage people, do what feels right. And if not acknowledging or not celebrating or not participating feels good to you for that year, don't question it. Don't put pressure on yourself.
That's helpful too, just giving people permission to kind of do whatever they feel. That's great. Yeah. All right, let me see if there are any other questions. Not at the moment. So if that's the case, I know there are a couple things. One, I'd love to hear do you have any just final words or advice for people that are just in this moment? Maybe it's very, very fresh for them, or they just can't move past this deep sense of grief related to their parents. Do you have any advice?
Yeah. I mean, I think, as I've mentioned, just be as present as possible. If anybody here also is in the process of losing someone they love, because there are a lot of people I know, at least in my community on Instagram, who are, seeing someone basically die right in front of their eyes, or they're in the process of losing them. One thing I definitely encourage, having watched that as well, is just be as present as you can, be present with them. Remember the inflections in their voice if they're still able to speak. Remember their mannerisms. Remember the feeling of their hand. I can feel both of my parents' hands, I swear, because I focused in on that. I in the moment. This sounds a little strange, but like my mom, I didn't mention this, but she had esophageal cancer, and throughout her journey, she had to get a tracheotomy at one point, and so that prevented her from being able to speak from then on. She never spoke again. Had I known that was going to be the case, I would have recorded some conversations. I would have gotten more video of her, things like that. I did get that with my dad, and I was, because I was like, I learned from this from mom just a few months ago, so let me get dad recording some things now too. And so if everyone's comfortable with that, just doing that. Yeah, anticipatory grief is a big one, so I just want to acknowledge those things. But I think if the loss has already happened, again, just giving yourself permission to grieve however you need to. Remember, there is zero timeline. There are so many self-imposed and externally imposed expectations and timelines and all of the things on us when we experience a loss. Pay it no mind. Again, I just bring it back to the moment. Write down how you're feeling about it. It can be very frustrating, quite frankly. I just want to acknowledge any feelings of frustration. The other thing too that actually just came up for me is we can often feel like things that people will make a big deal are no longer a big deal to us. I think a lot of grievers can relate to that, whether that is like in the acute grief process or like later down the line. So for example, I'm sure I see this with child loss. People are like complaining that their kid is being rambunctious or whatever. There are people out there that would, kill to have their child back. This happens to me all the time. Someone's complaining about their parent or their mom's nagging or whatever. I'm like, I would do crazy things to have my mom back here and nagging me, And so grief does nothing if not put things into perspective. So, but that's a really beautiful thing too, because I think grief definitely forces us to take a step back and realize what's important, realize what's not. It really can help us get a gauge on our emotions, perhaps better than we could before. It's a process of a lot of learnings. So I think if somebody's like really deep in it now, and you don't have to hear me on this right now, you don't have to take any action on this, but just know that I'm not going to say there's a lot of benefits to grief, but there's a lot of, I also feel weird using this word, but there's a lot of advantages that grief can teach us that we do not always have before, or not to the extent that we did before. Empathy, huge. Before anybody, I talked to that lost a parent or whatever, even if it's a different loss than I experienced, I can just imagine, because we've been there, right? The hurt, the pain, it can take you back. It can take you back to the moment that you lost that person, or you were about to lose that person, right? We do, I think a lot of us have better empathy for others, more gratitude for what we do have, what's in front of us. Again, what's important. And sometimes it's those little things. And that's what I always say if somebody is like journaling or, just having a tough time being, you could be looking at me right now and be like, Tara, I'm not grateful for anything. What are you talking about? Because if somebody had told me to be grateful in the first like few months after I lost my parents, I would have been like, go kick rocks, please. So I think that's why, whether it's a journaling practice, you can leave voice notes to yourself, to get out how you're feeling, talking with somebody, whatever feels good to you. But looking around you and being like, what do I have to be grateful for? Okay, I'm really grateful for this cappuccino I'm drinking this morning. I mean, when I say start small, I mean start really small. If you have a pet that is still with you, that's kind of a comfort to you during this time, be like, I am so grateful for this little creature that I have, just things like that. And I've noticed when literally when I was first journaling, I would be like, I'm grateful for the sun today. I'm grateful it's a sunny day. I'm grateful for the hummingbirds outside at the feeder because they're really cute and they remind me of my parents, because there's always two of them. I swear to God, outside. Our loved ones will send us signs, I promise you. So it's just those things. And just knowing and understanding that it's not that our losses and our grief and everything happen for a reason. I used to always be that girl. I was like, everything happens for a reason. And then I went through this and I was like, nope, this could not have happened for any good reason. I don't believe that anymore. I just have a different relationship with it now. So I'm not going to say it happened for a reason, but grief can happen. And it does have the potential to allow us to learn a lot, grow, and evolve. And it's all what we make of it. So I think that's just, again, planting seeds, but just remembering that at the end of the day, and just to start small and just baby steps.
That's, interestingly enough, that's actually how this company started. After I lost 3 family members and my boyfriend in 4 consecutive months.
Oh my God.
So that's actually turning, we always call it kind of how you turn grief into a gift or
Yes.
something like that. So, well, we just want to thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a true pleasure. I think your insights have been extremely helpful. Your advice for people that are going through this process. We have recorded it as well. We are going to be sharing it out to other organizations and on social quite a bit. So we just know that your time today you're paying it forward. You're helping others with the pain and the grief that you've experienced. if you are interested in connecting with Tara, it's Tara Tara. Let me make sure I get it right.
It's Tara, but
I respond to either one.
Okay, Tara. Okay. So if you'd like to get one-on-one grief coaching from Tara, you can go to lossesbecomegains@gmail.com. We place that in the chat. You can also listen to her podcast. We've traced that link to in the chat. She has the Grief Become Gains online course, which you can find at lossesbecomegains.com/courses. Is also in the chat. And grab Tara's Losses Becomes Gains journal. Oh, you have a wonderful journal as well. That's fantastic. You can find that at the website lossesbecomegains.com/journal. And Tara, it says that your favorite book on grief is The Grieving Brain.
Yes,
I cannot. There's a lot of good books out
there, but I cannot say enough about this book, because I won't go on a tangent here, but what I just will say is, grief, a lot of the times emotions are really talked about and things like that, which is all important. But I wish I had this book at the beginning of my grief journey, because it's sciencey, but in a way that's very approachable, and it really helps you understand what is going on in your brain, because our brain it's always changing. I think, I'm not a scientist, but what chemically is going on in your brain as you experience a loss and as you grieve, and what that looks like and means for you. And it was transformative. I mean, I had so many aha moments reading, and I actually literally one of the modules in my course is all about, grief in the brain and how grief affects it and all of that. So I think it's a really important, it's a part of not only my course, but the way that I coach. I think it is a really important aspect that needs to be paid attention to, that probably isn't enough. Just, again, just mechanically what is going on as all that's happening. And it really helps explain a lot of what we might be feeling and what's coming up for us. So yes, highly recommend.
The chat as well, and feel free to check that out. And I have a feeling we're going to start recommending it to our clients as well. So thank you for that. Well, we thank you for, again, being such a blessing to everyone today. We will certainly stay in contact with you, and would love to, I'm sure a number of people who are watching or will watch in the future will love to connect with you as well.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much for today.
This was wonderful.
Thank you. Alrighty. Thank you. Take care.